Welcome back to another deck discussion. I'm Megatrick, and this time we have a deck that I spent a little bit too much time labbing out. In Divine Set 7, Astroea got a new form with Stella. So I'll start with a brief history on the deck, and I'll go over the list that I've finally landed on. Historically, Astroea has been a deck whose game plan revolved around binding crits for effects. First, we have Unica, which got a crit and a drive for having 3 in bind. Next, we have Mask, which trades the crit for a restanding rearguard. However, the crits in bind do scale with additional power. And now we have Stella, which combines both Unica's crit and drive with Mask's restanding rearguard. But now we could also bind Astroea names from Soul. So here's the list I've landed on. As you can see, I've opted to go for the Mask build as opposed to just playing pure Stella. This is for a multitude of reasons which I'll go over a bit later on in the video. However, I felt that the pure Stella build was lacking in power, so that's why I've opted to play the Mask package to help close out games a bit more easily. As you can see, we have the new introduced Stella in your ride deck now. And outside of that, the list is fairly similar to my previous one, outside of additions like Fire Regulus, which wasn't out during set 5. But the list hasn't changed a lot, so let's go over the reasons why that is. So let's start with the Mask package. So the reason why I opted for the Mask package, instead of going for the pure Stella route, was once again, mainly the power. The biggest issue with Stella is your rearguards don't get a lot of power. All you get is additional 5k to front row, and that's it. Meaning that with Surge and Board Chimera, your restand is not very threatening even if it has a crit. It becomes very guardable even on Persona Ride turns. By supplementing it with the Mask package, you can restand for additional power as the game goes on, as more crits are then out. Also, with Mask, we also have more targets for Bifrons, because at the end of the day, drive checking your crits is a lot better than just ripping them out of your deck just to get a little bit more power. Up next, let me talk about the Boost Order package. Sagacious Schemer is a 15k booster at the end of the day, or turns any of your other grade 2s into boosters with Game of Underworld. A lot of people in this slot run Philia instead. Now, don't get me wrong, Philia is an amazing card. However, the uptime on Schemer is a lot more consistent and a lot better in terms of the power it gives. Philia is there to plus, but she's not always live. The deck does run a couple of orders, namely Cellosphere, Mask, but we will not be using those every single turn to ensure that Philia is live. Thus, I opted for a more consistent and more reliable booster that also helps us going second, which makes better grade 2 columns. And one of the biggest deviations is the exclusion of the new Pride Cyclers. These, on place or when discarded, you can Soul Blast 1 to get a Persona Shield ticket. My biggest issue with the Persona Shield ticket is just how limiting it really is. The deck inherently has a lot of discard targets, or cards that you want to discard with. We have Chimera to help stack the top card of your deck, and we have Stellar to help you actually Persona Ride from bind. We cannot discard this shield for either of these two targets. And a lot of the time, 10k guard is more of an additional thing. We more often than not want to guard with our crits to just get them in rotation, so that way we can shove them into Soul for later on. And the shield ticket kind of gets in the way of that. Don't get me wrong, fantastic card, I love this card, but I would just rather discard my crits and have them in rotation for my skills. So now let's go over the general game plan of the deck. Starting with a mulligan. Alright, I'm going to be completely honest here. You're going to be playing a Crest deck from Premium. This is your Crest maker. Please open Bifrons. Always keep her in mulligan, and if you don't see her, usually keeping cards like Griffith Chimera are just good to help dig for Bifrons, so it's usually these two are your main mulligan targets. With that out of the way, let's start playing the game. So your turn 1 and turn 0 obviously are just riding up. Turn 2 is where it starts to get interesting. Here, your ideal setup would be calling Bifrons, usually using Bifrons to move a Stella to Soul. and then calling down like a Chimera off of it. Ideally, you would also have a schemer as well to set up a 30k column with usually something stacked on top, or if not, you're ripping 2 cards out of there to help thin for more triggers. But this is your ideal setup on turn 2. Ideally, you want to confirm damage, so instead of going wide, like trilating like this, it's much more effective to make 2 bigger columns that your opponent will have trouble actually guarding, to help confirm damage later on. Typically intercept this away for grade 3, and once you ride up, you usually split off your columns like this, use Bifrons again to help call a Chimera, and here you just have a full board to help aggro with. Usually these numbers are very strong, this being a total of, 15 plus 8, 28 total, and this is then 30k total off of Stella's plus 5k to front row. This is usually very good if you're going first. Turn 4 onwards, you'd always Persona Ride Stella from Bind. Do similar things, except instead of reviving Chimera, you also now have the option to revive either Sturgeonborg to get additional crits, or Falcratia just to have more pressure with like just building bigger numbers. Because of the mask package, we run a surplus of grade 3s to help push another 15k guard of your opponent's hand, because she's usually 35 on Persona Ride, assuming you move a grade 3 in. Now, when should you mask in this deck? The mask is a very good option if you only have around 4 or more crits in rotation. This is purely because, at that point, both Baiko Mask and the thing that you restand get plus 10k, which helps concentrate the power instead of just spreading it out off of Stella, meaning your Sturgeonborg's crit actually is effective. So let's round out the video by going over my final thoughts. This deck is not very good, to be honest. The issue with Stella is that she doesn't work very well with her previous support. You'll often find yourself binding just Astroea names and not a lot of crits, which is very counterproductive as we've seen with the previous support, where they just want specifically crits in bind. Stella very much so feels like a side grade as opposed to a direct upgrade from Baiko Mask. But it is a very good bridge towards getting to Baiko Mask. The additional crit pressure and restand rearguard does help bridge the gap between your grade 3 turn and your kill turn. The pure Stella builds are very good at not relying on Bifrons. However, at the end of the day, if you don't open Bifrons, you're gonna go next. You're gonna have to go next. And, well, you're probably gonna go next anyways because you're playing fucking Astroea, but regardless. The biggest issue that I find is that Stella very much so feels incomplete as a deck. And honestly, the deck desperately needs a lot of supports. The Darkest generic pool is not that great, to be perfectly honest, and it's not enough to carry this deck to being remotely competitive, like, at all. Regardless, if you have the previous support, give the deck a shot. It's just the same deck as before, but just a little bit more, like, not a whole lot more, but just a little bit more. But I hope you've enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.